Brian, I want to talk about the 22 tight end recruiting, because if you look at the depth chart the way it is right now, the tight end the tight end depth chart is pretty stinking good. And I don't know if there's more room to bring in more guys. Now, of course, Notre Dame has a commitment in the tight end class in Jack Nickel already, which I'm a little surprised at. I think they could have passed at this point on the position, and it wouldn't have been a strikeout because you've got George Takis, who could even come back for another year, and you're not losing any of the tight ends with the exception of George Takis potentially. Not losing anybody going into next year. So I'm a little surprised that they got a commit. I guess maybe not completely surprised. But I believe it was a couple of years ago they took pass on tight end because they've
done that twice. They did that in 2016 and they did that in 2019 because they already had early commit. But in those years that they passed, that's because they already had early commitments.
From the next class.
Correct.
Right.
So like in 2016 they passed because they already had Brock Wright and Cole Kmet committed. Right. And then they took a pass in 2019 because they already had Michael Mayer and Kevin Bauman committed really early. Right. That's not the case in 2023. So it's a little different. But, yeah, they have passed on it before, and it's made sense to pass on in those instances.
So if you're on the staff and you're putting together the board, do you again, I know Jack Nickel is committed. He's coming to the class. So would you have put – we need one tight end, or would you have passed on the class completely?
I'd have definitely said they need one tight end personally. And there's two reasons for that. And I get your point. Like when you're just looking at the numbers, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But there's a couple things that I would consider. I never like doing you could bring so-and-so back because you can't guarantee he's going to want to come back. He's not going to be the number one tight end this year. That's going to be Michael Mayer. So when you look at this kid, you say, well, he could come back and be your number one, but there's going to be SEC and ACC schools saying you can come here and be our number, or he's not going to want to stay at Notre Dame and be number two when other schools are going to be talking to him about, hey, you can come here and be our number one. Right. And if you don't think that happens before kids get in the portal, you're out of your mind because there's ways to do that. You talk to a high school coach, you talk to a teammate of his.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Right.
And so, there's ways that you can get that done. And so if George Takis is a really good number two for Notre Dame this year, there's no guarantee that Notre Dame's last number two tight end went pro, Tommy Tremble, right?
Right.
The other part of it too is you have to start thinking about the fact that Michael Mayer may only be a 3-year player.
That's fair.
Your last two tight ends left after their third year, right? I mean, Tommy Tremble left after his true junior season. Cole Kmet left after his true junior season. So, and you've had that happen multiple times. I mean, going back to Kyle Rudolph left after his true junior year. So when guys step up and ball as freshmen, and as good as a lot of those guys were as freshmen, Kyle Rudolph, to me, had the best freshman year of all the tight ends until Michael Mayer came along. Because Tyler Eifert didn't play as a freshman. Troy Nicholas didn't play as a freshman. Ben Koyak was just sort of a rotation backup guy as a freshman. And Cole Kmet barely played. I think he had caught 2 passes as a freshman, both in mop-up duty in 2017. And then Brock Wright was just a blocker. So, I mean, Michael Mayer had a phenomenal freshman year. You can't start thinking, well, boy, we got 3 more years of this. No, you need to start preparing yourself for 2 more years of this and then be ready to move on. And then the other part is Mitchell Evans, to me, is a project that you're not sold that he's going to be a legit Notre Dame level player. Maybe he is, but right now you need to prepare yourself. So with all those things in mind, to me, you definitely need to bring in one. What's interesting is Notre Dame has thrown out like 3 tight end offers this week.
Yeah, which is crazy to me.
Yeah. Now, here's the worst part. Eli Raridan, his dad played at Notre Dame.
Okay.
And I remember like following his recruitment as a fan, and was feeling really old when I realized it was his dad. But he's a talented player, big-bodied kid. They just offered Holden Stace, who just recently decommitted from Penn State, who's really good. So here's my concern, Vince. My first thought is they're doubling down on the offense. So when you're primarily a 2 and 3 tight end offense, that's ball control, you don't need receivers. Yeah. And you need a bunch. So, you bring in 2 more tight ends and then you got 6 tight ends on the roster. Makes sense if you're running 3 tight ends all the time. So that's concerning to me that it looks like maybe they're doubling down. So maybe they take 1 less receiver and a second tight end, which to me would be a mistake. The only way you take a second tight end in this class is if after your first guy, you have a great player wants to come. Like he's got to be a Michael Mayer type. are, but that's why I thought it was a mistake to take Jack Nichols so early. Jack Nichols is a solid football player, but when you're Notre Dame and you've recruited tight end the way you have, you don't take a solid football player, especially early. So that was a bit of a head scratcher. And then now you're offering these top players, and it's like, okay, well, you do have an 85-man scholarship limit that you need to be thinking about.
Right.
And so one is the number, two to me seems excessive, and it means you're going to have to cut from somewhere else. And the places where they could possibly cut are problematic, because usually when you're building a recruiting class, you don't cut from a position that on the other side of the ball. You don't say, hey, Marcus Freeman, we're going to give you one less DB because we're going to take a second time. No, we're going to take one less receiver or one less back or one less offensive lineman. And I don't think those are positions where Notre Dame should be cutting for a tight end. I just don't see it. Unless it's like, again, you go, if you can go get another Michael Mayer, then you don't take a fifth offensive lineman. You don't take a second running back or a third wide receiver. You go get the next Michael Mayer. But that guy doesn't exist in the 2022 class for anybody, in my opinion.